The sun peeked through the cracks in the blinds of a small, cluttered apartment where Emma and Liam were deep in conversation. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, sticky notes plastered on the walls, and half-empty cups of coffee sat, forgotten. The air buzzed with excitement as they fine-tuned their plan, a scheme so bold it could either make them legends or leave them in ruins. For weeks now, they had been working tirelessly to prepare for what would be the most daring move of their careers. Emma adjusted her glasses, her sharp green eyes scanning over the documents spread out before her. She was known in legal circles as the strategist, a nickname earned from her uncanny ability to predict every twist and turn in a courtroom battle. Her mind worked like a chessboard, always thinking several moves ahead. Across from her, Liam leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the edge of the table. He was often called the closer, because once he stepped into a courtroom, there was no stopping him. Together, they made an unstoppable team, revered by colleagues and feared by opponents. But fame and accolades weren't enough for them anymore. They had grown tired of the spotlight that came with being top-tier attorneys. The constant attention, the endless networking events, and the pressure to maintain their perfect reputations weighed heavily on them. More importantly, they had started noticing something troubling, a pattern of corruption within the judicial system. Judges who abused their power, lawyers who bent the rules for personal gain, and innocent people caught in the crossfire. It gnawed at them both, especially when they realized how much harder it was for ordinary citizens without resources to fight back. That's when the idea struck them. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, over dinner, Emma casually mentioned Judge Harrison, a name that sent shivers down the spines of anyone unlucky enough to appear before him. Known for his biting sarcasm and disdain for anyone he deemed beneath him, Judge Harrison had become infamous for humiliating defendants during hearings. Stories circulated about how he mocked parents fighting custody battles, laughed off cases involving minor property disputes, and dismissed plaintiffs with barely concealed contempt. Yet, despite numerous complaints, nothing stuck. No one had ever managed to expose him. "What if we took him on?" Emma asked, her voice low but laced with determination. Liam raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You mean sue him? File a complaint? We'd need solid evidence." "No," Emma replied, shaking her head. "What if we went undercover? Pretended to be just another couple walking into his courtroom, totally unprepared. Let him underestimate us. Let him show his true colors, and then hit him where it hurts." At first, Liam thought she was joking. But as Emma laid out the details, the plan began taking shape. They wouldn't just walk into the courtroom, they'd transform themselves entirely. Gone would be the polished suits, the confident demeanor, and the razor-sharp arguments. Instead, they'd become Emma and Liam, a nervous, bumbling young couple trying to navigate their first legal battle. Their case? A deliberately mundane dispute over a tree whose branches had grown too close to their house. Nothing flashy, nothing complicated, just the kind of case Judge Harrison loved to brush aside. For days, they practiced their new personas in front of the mirror. Emma learned to fidget with her hands, avoiding eye contact whenever possible. She rehearsed stammering responses, making sure her sentences trailed off awkwardly. Liam, meanwhile, perfected the art of looking confused, scratching his head at random intervals and pretending to struggle with simple concepts. They even went shopping for clothes that screamed average rather than high-powered attorney. Baggy sweaters, scuffed shoes, and mismatched outfits became part of their disguise. Their preparation extended beyond appearances. They studied Judge Harrison's past rulings meticulously, searching for patterns that could help them anticipate his behavior. They discovered that he tended to lose patience quickly, often cutting people off mid-sentence if he found their arguments tedious. He also had a habit of mocking defendants' lack of legal knowledge, using their mistakes to bolster his own ego. Armed with this information, Emma and Liam crafted a strategy designed to exploit his arrogance while gathering evidence of his misconduct. As the big day approached, excitement mingled with nerves. Neither of them had ever attempted anything quite like this before. While they were confident in their abilities, there was always the risk of things going wrong. What if someone recognized them? What if Judge Harrison saw through their act? These questions haunted them, but they pushed forward, trusting in their skills and each other. On the morning of the hearing, Emma and Liam stood outside the courthouse, taking deep breaths to steady themselves. Around them, people bustled about, some clutching files, others whispering anxiously to companions. The imposing stone building loomed above them, its grandeur a stark contrast to the trivial nature of their supposed grievance. Hand in hand, they climbed the steps, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Courtrooms were rarely welcoming places, and Judge Harrison's chamber was no exception. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators, and the air carried a faint smell of old paper and polished oak. As they took their seats, Emma glanced at Liam, giving him a small, reassuring smile. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. When Judge Harrison entered, the room fell silent. Dressed in his black robe, he carried himself with an air of superiority, his piercing gaze sweeping over the attendees. His reputation preceded him, and everyone seemed to shrink under his scrutiny. When the clerk announced their case, Emma and Liam exchanged a quick look, silently reminding themselves to stay in character. As they rose to address the judge, Emma stumbled slightly, clutching her notes tightly. Her voice trembled as she began speaking, deliberately stumbling over her words. Your Honor, we're here today because, well, our neighbor's tree. She paused, glancing nervously at Liam, who offered an equally hesitant nod. Judge Harrison's lips curled into a smirk, and Emma knew they were right on track. Little did he know the real battle was only beginning. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of anticipation and tension as Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, peering down at Emma and Liam, with an expression that could only be described as thinly veiled disdain. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming rhythmically on the polished wooden surface of the bench. His reputation for arrogance was well-deserved, and it didn't take long for him to make his presence felt. Well, he began, his tone dripping with condescension. What do we have here? A couple of amateurs, perhaps? The word amateurs rolled off his tongue like an insult, and the corners of his mouth twitched into a smug smile. He glanced briefly at the spectators, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Emma, still playing the role of a nervous defendant, clutched her notes tighter, her knuckles turning white. She forced herself to look flustered, avoiding eye contact with the judge. Her voice quivered as she tried again. Your Honor, our neighbor's tree. Its branches are hanging over our yard, and they're causing problems. We thought— Oh, you thought? Judge Harrison interrupted, raising an eyebrow. His voice carried a theatrical edge, as if he were performing for an audience rather than presiding over a hearing. Let me guess. You thought you'd waltz into my courtroom without knowing the first thing about how the law works, is that it? Liam stepped forward hesitantly, scratching the back of his neck. We just wanted to fix this issue, Your Honor. It seemed simple enough. Simple? Judge Harrison barked, leaning forward now, his eyes narrowing. Mr. What did you say your name was again? Liam stammered, deliberately fumbling over his words. And this is my wife, Emma. Ah, yes, Mr. and Mrs. Bumbling Novices, Judge Harrison said, drawing a few muffled chuckles from the gallery. He waved a hand dismissively. Do you even know what jurisdiction means? Or how to file a proper complaint? Because based on what I've seen so far, I'm not convinced you've done either. Emma swallowed hard, pretending to be overwhelmed. She shuffled her papers nervously, letting one slip and flutter to the floor. As she bent down to pick it up, Judge Harrison sighed dramatically, rolling his eyes. Oh, for heaven's sake. Is this really the best use of my time? A dispute over some leaves and twigs? The comment sparked murmurs among the spectators, though no one dared speak up. Judge Harrison thrived on these moments, feeding off the discomfort of others while reinforcing his own superiority. To him, Emma and Liam were nothing more than easy targets, perfect fodder for his ridicule. But what he failed to realize was that every snide remark, every impatient sigh, was exactly what they had hoped for. As the hearing dragged on, Judge Harrison grew increasingly irritated. Every attempt by Emma and Liam to present their case was met with mockery. When Emma mentioned property lines, he scoffed. Property lines? You think I care about where your imaginary line ends and begins? This isn't kindergarten, sweetheart. When Liam stumbled over the term nuisance, Judge Harrison practically threw his hands in the air. Nuisance? That's the legal term you're reaching for? Good grief, son. Maybe you should stick to raking leaves instead of trying to argue them away. Despite his harsh words, Emma and Liam remained unfazed. Beneath their carefully crafted facade of incompetence, they were meticulously cataloging every interaction. Each sarcastic remark, each dismissive gesture, and each biased ruling added another brick to the wall of evidence they were building against him. They exchanged subtle glances, silently communicating their progress. Their plan was working perfectly, but they knew better than to let their guard down. At one point, Judge Harrison decided to take things a step further. Leaning back in his chair, he crossed his arms and addressed the couple with mock sympathy. You two seem genuinely confused, so let me break it down for you. Courts exist to handle serious matters, not petty squabbles about trees. If everyone came here complaining about every little inconvenience, we'd never get anything done. Do you understand? Emma nodded meekly, her cheeks flushed as if embarrassed. Yes, Your Honor. We just didn't know where else to go. And that's precisely the problem, Judge Harrison replied, shaking his head. People like you waste valuable resources because you don't bother educating yourselves. Maybe next time try reading a book, or hiring someone who actually knows what they're doing. The jab landed exactly where he intended it to, eliciting a few more stifled laughs from the crowd. What Judge Harrison didn't realize, however, was that Emma and Liam were using his arrogance against him. By allowing him to dominate the conversation, they gave him ample opportunity to reveal his true colors. And reveal them he did. As the hearing continued, Judge Harrison's behavior became increasingly erratic. He dismissed key points raised by Emma and Liam without giving them proper consideration, cutting them off mid-sentence and steering the discussion back to his own grievances about trivial cases clogging up the system. At one point, he even muttered, under his breath loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Why do I always get stuck with these fools?" By now the tension in the room was palpable. Some spectators shifted uneasily in their seats, sensing that something wasn't quite right. Others openly smirked, entertained by the spectacle unfolding before them. Few suspected that beneath the surface, Emma and Liam were orchestrating a masterclass in patience and precision. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Judge Harrison announced his decision. In light of the, shall we call it, evidence presented today, he said, emphasizing the word with a sneer, I find no grounds to rule in favor of the plaintiffs. Case dismissed. Emma and Liam exchanged a quick glance, their hearts racing. On the surface, they appeared defeated, heads bowed as if accepting the judge's verdict. But inside, they were celebrating. They had achieved their goal. Judge Harrison had shown his true nature, leaving behind a trail of insults and questionable rulings that would soon come back to haunt him. As the gavel struck the desk, signaling the end of the hearing, Emma and Liam gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. Judge Harrison watched them go, clearly pleased with himself. In his mind, he had won. Another victory in a long line of trivial cases unworthy of his time. What he didn't see was the quiet determination in Emma's eyes or the barely concealed smirk on Liam's face as they exited the courtroom. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Emma and Liam paused for a moment, taking in the scene around them. The day had been exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. They had faced one of the most intimidating figures in the legal world and emerged unscathed. More importantly, they had gathered everything they needed to expose the truth. We've got him, Emma whispered, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Liam nodded, a grin spreading across his face. He doesn't stand a chance. With renewed energy, they walked toward their car, ready to move on to the next phase of their plan. The real battle was just beginning, and Judge Harrison had no idea what was coming. The courtroom was eerily quiet as Emma and Liam gathered their scattered papers, their movements slow and deliberate. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He believed he had won this round, that he had successfully humiliated the young couple and sent them packing with nothing to show for their efforts. But what he didn't realize was that the game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Emma glanced at Liam, her eyes flickering, with determination. It was time to turn the tables, and they had been preparing for this moment for weeks. With a deep breath, she straightened her posture slightly, still maintaining the appearance of nervousness but injecting a hint of resolve into her stance. She cleared her throat softly, drawing the judge's attention once more. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling but clear enough to be heard. "Before we leave, might I ask one last question?" Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed that the hearing wasn't quite finished yet. "Make it quick," he snapped, tapping his gavel impatiently against the bench. "I've already wasted enough time on this nonsense." Emma nodded, meekly, clutching her notes tightly. "Of course, Your Honor, I just wanted to understand something. You mentioned earlier that courts are meant to handle serious matters, not, petty disputes like ours, is that right?" The judge sighed heavily, rolling his eyes. Yes, that's exactly what I said. Are you going somewhere with this? Or are you simply wasting my time again?" Emma hesitated for effect, glancing down at her papers before looking up timidly. "Well, Your Honor, I guess I'm confused because, well, isn't it also true that even small cases deserve fair treatment under the law? That everyone has the right to present their side without being dismissed outright?" A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some spectators exchanged curious glances while others sat up straighter, intrigued by the sudden shift in tone. Judge Harrison, however, remained unimpressed. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, come now. Don't try to lecture me on fairness. You're hardly in a position to make such arguments." Emma bit her lip, feigning uncertainty. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I don't mean to offend. I'm just trying to learn. Because if the court can't treat all cases equally, then how can people trust the system? How do they know they'll get a fair chance?" The judge's expression darkened. He leaned forward, his voice sharp and cutting. "Let me clarify something for you, Ms. What did you say your name was again?" "Emma," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right, Ms. Emma," he continued, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "The legal system doesn't exist to coddle every individual who walks through these doors. It exists to uphold justice efficiently, and sometimes that means prioritizing cases that actually matter. Now, does that answer your question, or do I need to spell it out further?" Emma nodded quickly as though intimidated by his response. "Thank you, Your Honor. That helps a lot." She paused, lowering her gaze briefly before adding, almost shyly, "But there's just one more thing." "What now?" Judge Harrison barked, his patience wearing thin. His irritation was growing visibly, and several members of the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the tension building in the room. Liam stepped forward then, stepping out of his role as the awkward, confused husband. Though his demeanor still appeared hesitant, there was a newfound clarity in his words. "Your Honor, forgive me for speaking up, but doesn't the law require judges to apply consistent standards to all cases, regardless of how serious they seem?" Judge Harrison froze for a fraction of a second, caught off guard by the unexpected challenge. He recovered quickly, however, narrowing his eyes at Liam. "Who exactly do you think you are, questioning my authority? Do you have any idea how many years I've spent on the bench? How many cases I've presided over? I'm nobody, Your Honor," Liam stammered, deliberately keeping his tone deferential. "Just a regular guy trying to understand how things work. But I read somewhere, maybe it was a book or maybe it was online, that consistency is key to fairness, that judges are supposed to follow precedent, no matter the circumstances." The judge scoffed loudly, waving a hand dismissively. "Precedent? Precedent applies to real cases, Mr. Whatever your name is, not trivial squabbles about trees and property lines. But isn't precedent part of the foundation of our legal system? Emma interjected, her voice gaining strength despite her outward display of nervousness. If judges pick and choose which rules to follow based on their personal opinions, doesn't that undermine the entire process? For the first time, Judge Harrison looked genuinely flustered. He stared at the couple, his brow furrowing as he tried to figure out where this line of questioning was leading. Was this some kind of trap? He couldn't tell, but he refused to back down. Instead, he doubled down on his condescension, hoping to shut them up once and for all. "You two clearly don't understand how the law works," he declared, his voice rising slightly. "It's not about rigid adherence to rules. It's about using judgment, about knowing when to prioritize certain cases over others. And frankly, people like you wouldn't know the first thing about making those kinds of decisions." Emma and Liam exchanged a subtle glance, their plan falling perfectly into place. They had pushed him to reveal his bias, to admit that he operated based on his own subjective criteria rather than objective legal principles. Now it was time to introduce the evidence they'd been carefully gathering throughout the hearing. "Actually, Your Honor," Emma said, her voice steadier now, "we've done some research, and we found something interesting." She reached into her folder and pulled out a document, holding it up tentatively. "This is a ruling you made 3 years ago in a similar case. A homeowner sued their neighbor over tree branches encroaching on their property. Back then, you ruled in favor of the plaintiff, citing nuisance laws and emphasizing the importance of respecting property rights. Does that sound familiar?" Judge Harrison's face paled slightly, though he quickly masked his reaction with a sneer. "Every case is different," he retorted sharply. "You can't compare apples to oranges." "Ah, but that's the thing," Liam chimed in, his confidence growing. "The facts of both cases are nearly identical. Same issue, same legal grounds, same type of evidence presented. Yet today, you dismissed our case outright without even considering the merits. Why is that, Your Honor? Could it be because you decided beforehand that our case wasn't worth your time?" The courtroom erupted into murmurs, the tension reaching a breaking point. Spectators exchanged shocked looks, whispering among themselves, as the implications sank in. Judge Harrison, meanwhile, struggled to maintain his composure. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the bench, his mind racing for a way to counter their argument. "That's preposterous," he exclaimed, his voice louder now. "I base my rulings on the specifics of each case, not on arbitrary factors." "Then why the inconsistency?" Emma pressed gently, her tone calm but firm. "Why did you rule one way 3 years ago and another way today? Unless—" She trailed off dramatically, letting the implication hang in the air. Judge Harrison's face flushed red with anger. "Enough of this charade. I will not be interrogated by amateurs who have no business questioning my integrity." But Emma and Liam weren't finished yet. Slowly, methodically, they began presenting additional examples of Judge Harrison's past rulings, each one highlighting patterns of bias and favoritism. They cited cases where he dismissed claims from low-income plaintiffs while granting leniency to wealthy defendants. They pointed out instances where his remarks during hearings bordered on harassment, and they quoted excerpts from transcripts that painted a damning picture of a judge who valued his ego over justice. By the time they concluded, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted entirely. What had started as a routine hearing had transformed into a public reckoning. Spectators watched in stunned silence as Judge Harrison sputtered and fumed, unable to refute the evidence laid out before him. For the first time in his career, he was the one on trial, and he knew it. As the final piece of documentation was placed on the record, Emma and Liam shared a triumphant glance. Their plan had worked flawlessly. They had lured Judge Harrison into revealing his true nature, exposing him for the biased, arrogant figure he truly was, and now the world would see him for who he really was. With a quiet nod to each other, they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. As they walked out of the courtroom, the weight of what they had accomplished settled over them. Justice wasn't always served in grand gestures or dramatic victories. It often came in moments like this when truth shone light into darkness. And as they stepped into the sunlight outside, they knew their fight was far from over. The courtroom was alive with murmurs and whispers, a stark contrast to the tense silence that had dominated just moments before. Emma and Liam stood at the center of it all, their carefully constructed personas of nervous incompetence now completely stripped away. In their place stood two confident, razor-sharp attorneys who commanded the room with every word they spoke. Judge Harrison, on the other hand, sat frozen in his chair, his face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief. For the first time in years, he was no longer in control. Emma took a step forward, her voice steady and clear as she addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor," she began, her tone calm but firm, "we came here today not because we needed resolution for a tree branch, but because we wanted answers. Answers about why some people are treated fairly in your courtroom while others are dismissed without a second thought." Judge Harrison sputtered, struggling to regain his composure. "This is outrageous. You've twisted facts and taken things out of context. I won't stand for this kind of slander." Liam stepped up beside Emma, his expression serious but composed. "With all due respect, Your Honor, slander involves false statements. Everything we've presented here today is backed by evidence. Court, transcripts, rulings, and even witness accounts. We're not accusing you of anything. We're simply pointing out patterns that speak for themselves." The gallery erupted into hushed conversations, spectators leaning toward one another to share their thoughts. Some nodded approvingly, while others looked stunned by the revelations unfolding before them. Even the court clerk seemed uneasy, glancing nervously between the judge and the couple at the center of the storm. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down hard, trying to restore order. "Enough!" he barked, his voice trembling with frustration. "I will not tolerate this circus any longer. If you have grievances, take them elsewhere. This is my courtroom, and I will not be subjected to baseless accusations." Emma raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Baseless, Your Honor? Let's revisit what we've discussed so far, shall we?" She turned to address the audience, her voice carrying authority. 3 years ago, Judge Harrison ruled in favor of a plaintiff in a case nearly identical to ours. Yet today he dismissed our claim without proper consideration. Why? Because he decided beforehand that our case wasn't worth his time, a decision based not on legal merit but on personal bias. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "And that's not all. Over the past decade, numerous complaints have been filed against Judge Harrison for similar behavior. Plaintiffs from marginalized communities report being mocked, belittled, or outright ignored during hearings. Meanwhile, wealthier defendants receive leniency and understanding. Coincidence? Or proof of a pattern?" The judge's face reddened, further, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the bench. "You're twisting reality to fit your narrative. These allegations are unfounded and reckless." Liam shook his head, pulling out a thick folder filled with documents. "Reckless? No, Your Honor, thorough, yes. Before coming here today, we spent months gathering evidence, not just from public records but also from individuals who've appeared in your courtroom. People like Ms. Rodriguez, whose eviction case was dismissed after Judge Harrison called her argument pathetic. Or Mr. Patel, whose business dispute was thrown out because, according to the transcript, it was deemed too trivial to waste time on." He flipped through the pages, holding up specific excerpts for everyone to see. "These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a larger trend. A trend that suggests Judge Harrison values efficiency over justice and prejudice over fairness." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder, some spectators nodding in agreement while others whispered urgently to their neighbors. The tide had shifted dramatically, and Judge Harrison could feel it slipping away from him. His attempts to dominate the conversation only made him look more defensive, more guilty. Desperate to regain control, he turned to the bailiff. "Remove them from my courtroom immediately. This is contempt of court." Emma crossed her arms, unflinching. "Contempt of court? For exposing the truth? I think the real question is whether you are in contempt of the law, Your Honor. After all, isn't impartiality a cornerstone of judicial integrity?" The judge's eyes widened, his jaw tightening as he realized the gravity of the situation. He couldn't silence them, not without drawing even more attention to their claims. Every attempt to shut them down only gave them another opening to expose his misconduct. Liam seized the moment, stepping closer to the bench. "We're not here to humiliate you, Your Honor," he said, his tone softer but still resolute. "We're here because the system depends on accountability. When judges abuse their power, it erodes trust in the entire legal process. That's why we've documented everything, from your biased rulings to your dismissive remarks. And if necessary, we'll present this evidence to higher authorities." Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, visibly shaken. For the first time, he looked less like an untouchable figure of authority and more like a man cornered. The arrogance that had defined him throughout the hearing was crumbling under the weight of undeniable facts. Emma glanced at the spectators, her gaze steady. "To everyone watching today, let this serve as a reminder. Justice isn't blind unless we make it so. It's up to us to hold those in power accountable, to ensure that no one is above the law." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of approval from several members of the audience. One elderly woman wiped tears from her eyes, mouthing a silent "thank you" to Emma and Liam. Another man stood up, clapping softly before sitting back down. The atmosphere had transformed entirely, shifting from tension to hope. As the hearing drew to a close, Judge Harrison issued a final ruling, dismissing the case, though his voice lacked its earlier bravado. "Case dismissed," he muttered, barely audible. The gavel struck the desk with little force, a hollow echo of his former dominance. Emma and Liam exchanged a triumphant glance before gathering their belongings. As they walked out of the courtroom, the gallery erupted into applause, a rare sight in a setting typically marked by formality and restraint. Spectators lined up to shake their hands, thanking them for standing up to someone who had long gone unchecked. Outside the courthouse, the sun bathed the steps in golden light. Emma and Liam paused for a moment, taking in the scene around them. Reporters swarmed the area, eager to capture their story, but the couple remained focused. They knew this victory was just the beginning. "We did it," Liam said, his voice filled with pride. Emma smiled, her eyes reflecting both relief and determination. "Yes, we did, but there's still work to be done. Judges like Harrison aren't the exception, they're part of a bigger problem. If we want real change, we can't stop here." Liam nodded, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Then, let's keep going." Together, hand in hand, they descended the courthouse steps, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their mission was far from over, but for now, they allowed themselves a moment to savor the triumph. Justice might be slow, but when pursued with courage and conviction, it was always within reach. The days following the courtroom showdown were a whirlwind for Emma and Liam. News of their audacious plan spread like wildfire, capturing headlines across the nation. Journalists scrambled to piece together the story of how two seemingly ordinary individuals had exposed one of the most powerful judges in the system. Social media buzzed with hashtags like "Justice Exposed" and "Ashton Courage in Courtroom" as people shared clips of the hearing and praised the couple's bravery. Overnight, Emma and Liam became symbols of hope, a reminder that even the most entrenched systems could be challenged by determination and clever strategy. For Judge Harrison, however, the aftermath was devastating. The evidence presented by Emma and Liam was thorough and damning, leaving no room for denial. Within days, formal investigations were launched into his conduct. Former plaintiffs came forward with their own stories of mistreatment, adding fuel to the fire. One woman recounted how he had laughed during her domestic abuse case, dismissing her claims as dramatic nonsense. A young entrepreneur described being ridiculed for seeking damages after a breach of contract, only to have his case thrown out without explanation. Each account painted a picture of a man who viewed his position not as a duty, but as a tool for personal gratification. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Judge Harrison's behavior was part of a larger pattern. Internal memos revealed complaints dating back years, all ignored or brushed aside by higher-ups unwilling to challenge someone of his stature. But this time was different. With public pressure mounting and irrefutable proof laid bare, there was no escaping accountability. After weeks of hearings and deliberations, Judge Harrison was suspended from the bench pending further review. His once imposing presence in the courthouse was replaced by whispers of relief among those who had feared stepping foot inside his courtroom. Meanwhile, Emma and Liam found themselves thrust into the spotlight they had worked so hard to avoid. Requests for interviews poured in, along with invitations to speak at conferences and universities. While they appreciated the recognition, they remained grounded, refusing to let fame distract them from their mission. Instead of basking in accolades, they used the platform to advocate for broader reforms within the judicial system. They spoke passionately about the need for transparency, accountability, and empathy in every courtroom. Their message resonated deeply, inspiring others to take action against corruption wherever they saw it. One evening, as they sat together on the couch in their modest apartment, Emma flipped through a stack of letters sent by supporters. Some thanked them for giving voice to the voiceless. Others shared personal experiences of injustice, asking for advice on how to fight back. Liam watched her quietly, marveling at the impact they'd made, not just on Judge Harrison's career but on countless lives. "You know," Emma said softly, setting the letters aside, "this is what it's all about. Not the applause or the headlines, but knowing we've helped people feel seen, like their struggles matter." Liam nodded, reaching for her hand. "And now we've got a chance to do even more, to take on bigger challenges, tackle deeper issues. It won't be easy, but if we can pull off something like this..." He gestured toward the pile of papers, which included transcripts, news clippings, and fan mail. "Then imagine what else we can achieve." Their next steps weren't immediately clear, but they knew one thing for certain. They couldn't stop here. Exposing Judge Harrison had been a victory, but it was merely a single battle in a much larger war. Corruption didn't end with one bad judge. It festered in corners both visible and hidden, perpetuated by complacency and fear. Emma and Liam vowed to keep pushing boundaries, using their skills to dismantle barriers that stood between ordinary citizens and justice. Over the following months, they launched a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting underrepresented communities navigating the legal system. They partnered with law students, retired attorneys, and grassroots activists to create resources for those unable to afford representation. Workshops, free clinics, and educational campaigns became staples of their work, empowering individuals to stand up for their rights. The initiative quickly gained traction, drawing volunteers and donors eager to contribute to meaningful change. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect of their journey was the connections they forged along the way. People from all walks of life reached out to share their stories, some offering gratitude, others seeking guidance. Each interaction reinforced their belief that everyone deserved access to fair treatment under the law. Whether helping a single mother fight eviction or mentoring a teenager interested in pursuing a career in law, Emma and Liam approached every task with humility and heart. Of course, their path wasn't without obstacles. Critics accused them of grandstanding, claiming their methods were too unconventional or risky. Others dismissed their efforts as idealistic, arguing that systemic change required more than individual acts of defiance. But Emma and Liam refused to let negativity deter them. They understood that progress often came slowly, built brick by brick through persistence and collaboration. Every setback was an opportunity to learn, adapt, and grow stronger. On a crisp autumn morning, nearly a year after their confrontation with Judge Harrison, Emma and Liam returned to the same courthouse, where it all began. This time, however, they weren't there to play roles. They were invited speakers at a symposium on judicial reform. As they walked through the familiar halls, memories flooded back. The nervous energy before their hearing, the tension in the courtroom, the moment when everything shifted. It felt surreal to be standing there now, celebrated rather than underestimated. When it was their turn to address the audience, Emma stepped up to the podium, her voice steady yet warm. "A lot has changed since we first entered this building," she began, scanning the crowd of lawyers, judges, and activists. "But one thing remains constant: the power of courage. Courage to question authority, to challenge norms, and to believe in the possibility of change, even when it seems impossible." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "We didn't set out to become heroes. We simply wanted to hold someone accountable for actions that undermine trust in our legal system. What we learned along the way is that accountability starts with us. with ordinary people willing to step up and say, "Enough." When we stand together, we remind ourselves and those in power that justice isn't just a word, it's a promise. Applause erupted throughout the room, echoing off the high ceilings and filling the space with energy. Liam joined Emma at the podium, smiling as he added, "And remember, none of us are alone in this fight. There's strength in numbers, and there's hope in action. So whether you're filing a complaint, volunteering your time, or simply speaking up when something feels wrong, know that you're making a difference." As they left the stage, surrounded by cheers and handshakes, Emma and Liam felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their journey had been unpredictable, challenging, and occasionally overwhelming, but it had also been profoundly rewarding. They had proven that even the most daunting adversaries could be confronted with creativity, teamwork, and unwavering resolve. Later that evening, as they strolled through the park near their home, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Emma turned to Liam with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what's next? Where we'll go from here?" Liam chuckled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Honestly, I don't think we'll ever run out of battles to fight, or people to help. The world's full of problems waiting to be solved. All we have to do is keep showing up." Emma smiled, leaning into him as they continued walking. For now, they were content to savor the moment, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to make a difference. Together, they faced the future with optimism, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. Because justice wasn't just a destination, it was a journey, one they were proud to travel side by side.